So, hello and welcome from from Vienna, Austria. Today's webinar is brought to you by the Intersection Group. And I'm the president of the Intersection Group. I started our journey 3 years ago, and then I met Milan Günther, and together we now founded a not-for-profit association. And together with me from the Netherlands, we have one of our most active advising members of the Intersection Group, Mr.
Hi, Bard Papegaaij here. Australian-Dutch-Australian or Dutch-Australian-Dutch, I can't remember anymore, but currently in the Netherlands.
Okay, so today, what we'll be talking about? We'll be talking about our book, and as you can see, Bart and me, we both are authors of this book together with Milan Günther and Annika Kleiber. And today, we will be talking about our impact patterns. So if we look at this spiral here, that's the structure we've had in the patterns. We will talk about these 11 patterns and some administrative stuff. Please feel free to ask questions whenever they come to your mind, and we will answer them when we discuss a certain pattern as soon as possible. So please just type them to the chat and we will answer them. We are just a small group today. And we will present each of these 11 patterns. And I think at the end of the show, we will also have some time for a nice discussion with you. So we hope that there are many questions you're asking.
Yeah. So, did you want to do this one?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Shall I take over here? So, we wrote a pattern book. And why a pattern book? Well, first of all, because we were inspired by some of the pattern books that were around. They encapsulate experience from real life in a really condensed form. So on a single page, you can squeeze in a lot of practical, proven knowledge. But underneath that single page is usually a world of experience. And what patterns actually give you is sort of a key and lock situation. If you recognize the situation, then the pattern gives you a key to unlock that situation and do something useful based on the pattern. It doesn't mean that the pattern gives you the whole answer, though, right? The pattern gives you an approach to finding the answer that you otherwise might not consider. It gives you behavioral tips. It gives you a different way of looking at the situation. And if we've done our work correctly, you should recognize these situations when you read the patterns. That's the whole idea of it. So if we go to the spiral, for instance, these 11 impact patterns, they were based basically on a question that came back all the time, right? I'm working really hard. I'm an enterprise architect and I'm running around like crazy. I'm an enterprise designer. I'm doing so much work. I'm talking to everybody. I'm making the most beautiful diagrams in the world. My enterprise architect diagrams are thicker than anybody else's. I produce 600 pages of technical specs, and still I don't have any impact. Still, they don't do what I tell them. Still, they won't listen to me. I'm still the last person speaking at any important meeting, and when they make decisions, they never invite me for advice. So what's going on there was the question. And we thought, okay, one thing that is a recurring, and that's why it's a spiral, a recurring activity as an enterprise designer, which could be an architect, a designer, a business, how do you call it? What do you call them nowadays? Organizational designer, right? Or a business analyst. One thing you need to consistently work on all the time is improving or expanding your impact. And so we start somewhere in the insignificant middle almost. Right? We start on a blank page in the middle of an organization that we may not know, or that we have just, either we were just seconded to that organization, or we're an external, or we've just moved into a new position. Everything is unknown. And people don't know us either. So we need to find ways of getting our impact growing. And that's what these 11 patterns are in that spiral. Now, we don't want you to think that you have to walk the spiral in one direction only. Sometimes you jump back and forth. But the idea is to find ways to make the spiral bigger and bigger and bigger. And so when we go through these patterns, the idea is that yeah, there is a little bit of a sequence in there. Some things you need to do first before you can do the others. But when you've done some of the others, you may have to go back to the first one because you got it not complete or not exactly the way it needed, or you've learned new things and you think, well, with the new information, I may have to redo certain things. So the spiral goes back and forth, but there is a progression.
Yeah. And
All
you mentioned a few roles already.
yeah,
Yeah, so I wanna highlight this a bit.
yeah,
When we talk about those disciplines, we typically speak of user experience designers, business architects, enterprise architects, process managers, people designing the organization. And we have had a lot of discussions in the intersection group, and we discussed what do all of these co-designing disciplines have in common. And that was they are so frustrated because they have a limited impact. And they have a limited impact because they only see one part of the elephant. They only design software, they only design processes, only services designers. So if you talk to UX people, they are frustrated because many of their designs are never implemented. And if you, I'm more the enterprise architect, right? So if you talk to the software guys, IT guys, we are really frustrated because we just have a limited impact. And the reason, and that's what we want to solve with the intersection group and also with the pattern book, we believe that the reason is that the connection is missing between the disciplines. So the 11 patterns we will present today, they are true for all design disciplines, so not only for enterprise architects. That's the same thing when you talk to org designers and to user experience designers. That's just I wanted to add.
yeah. Okay.
Shall we start
So
with the first one or anything?
if there's no questions, but feel free to
Not
to
yet.
to throw questions or challenges because we have a small group, so there's time to talk about things.
Okay, then let's start with number one.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll take this one because this is one of my favorites. So this is it's been quite a bit of a discussion about this one. It's about when you go into a new assignment. Um, don't just walk in like a blank page, even though you don't necessarily know a lot about what you're going to do and you don't know the people yet and you don't know the situation yet. I find that too many of the people that I used to work with in the past had so little expectation about what they were going to do that they had absolutely no response to the demands that were thrown in their direction, and they just felt pushed around, and they very often ended up with an assignment or a version of the assignment that they actually weren't very happy with. And I think the secret is that before you go in, make sure you know what you're worth and what your best contributions usually are and what you think you're coming to do there. And that doesn't mean that you rigidly go in and you never change your ideas, but have a good story about your value. So if you see the context, which is the key to the situation, if you end up with work that you feel is not of value, but also not the best work that you could do, or maybe even completely the wrong work to do. For instance, my last assignment as an enterprise architect, they all of a sudden asked me to correct other people's process diagrams. And I thought, wait a minute, that's not what I became an enterprise architect for, to get process diagrams thrown over the wall to correct them. I don't even know what a correct process diagram looks like if I don't have the context for it. So if you find yourself in that situation, this is the answer. Have a personal enterprise vision, right? So think of yourself as a craftsman, a master craftsman. You know your skills, you know your strength, you know what kind of values you can bring to an organization, and be very clear about that from the moment you go in. So when people then talk to you and push you in directions, or they try to find things for you to do, it's much easier to negotiate with them about, yeah, well, that's important, but probably not what I should be doing. Or have you thought about this? This is maybe much better that I do that instead. So that's what a personal enterprise vision is about. It's your vision of how you can best help the enterprise. That helps you to push back at improper demands, mismatched expectations. And then this is the first time you'll see the word co-creators on the page, by the way. Co-creators will come back a lot. Co-creators are all the people that together make an enterprise. So co-creators are not just the people with a design or an implementation title. Anyone that contributes to the evolution of the enterprise, we call a co-creator. So you got a lot of them. You better have a clear story for them so they know who you are and what they can expect from you.
Yeah. Maybe speaking as an enterprise architect, what always happens in all the projects and all my friends working in this discipline's experience is that it's really simple that you get pulled into software development projects, because usually you are also quite a good IT engineer and you've been a software architect. And I know many enterprise architects that in reality do software solution architecture. They are the most senior software architects in the teams. That's good for the software teams, but that's a pity for the enterprise architecture teams. Yeah? So if you are aware, when you start a new assignment, be aware what is it, what you want to do, what you can do, what are your strengths. And it can happen, and this is the last pattern of today, so that is a sneak preview. It can happen that you recognize after 1 year or so that your personal enterprise vision is not aligned with the enterprise vision of the enterprise. And then it might be a good idea to leave. But okay, that's a sneak preview.
Yeah, don't jump ahead, Wolfgang. But
Yeah, okay.
what people are typing here as well is
yeah, but no questions yet.
Yeah. Now it helps you be consistent, right? If you have your own story, then you can have a consistent reply to mismatched demands. And what I found is the more consistent you are, the more people will be inclined to then change their demands to match your expectations. So if you go in as a blank page, their expectations fill in your page. If you have the page already sort of sketched out, then they will adjust their expectations to that story. So be the first to have the expectations. That's actually.
And Jonathan,
I love doing it for the year as well. I saw that point about do it for the year 2020. Yeah, absolutely. That's what I'm doing at the moment. I want to have a personal enterprise vision for 2020, so that people can throw things at me and I can just say, no, doesn't match my vision. How about this?
Jonathan, thank you for your comment.
Yeah.
When the manager says, yes, I know you can do X and we hired you for X, but right now we need Y. Can you be a team player and do Y? Of course, he's your boss, right? But I would quit personally. I would not, if this happens too often, it's not a good idea to do something you don't want, but that's maybe the pattern. But I know the reality, and that situation, I also experienced that situation.
You can use this actually. One last thing. You can use this as a negotiation. If I've actually negotiated with bosses where I said, look, I'm happy to do this, but it's not what I should be doing. So in return for doing this, can you do me a favor? And then I asked the boss for something that was important to me. And then they understood that this is a negotiation. Not all bosses go for it, but the better bosses are perfectly capable of seeing the benefits of having this kind of negotiation so that we all get something we want.
Okay. The next one sounds a bit obvious. Pre-existing wisdom. And this is one of the patterns I created in the book. So when you're on a new assignment, you must be aware that there's always a wealth of knowledge available. So it's a good idea to look around and look at the website. There you find something about the brand, the mission, the vision. Look at the process model. Then you get some understanding about what the business is doing. Because usually when you're in a new assignment as an enterprise designer or enterprise architect, whatever design role, you might not have any domain knowledge in the business domain. And yes, and we know that in the first half year or so, you're totally overwhelmed with the complexity of the business. And I've seen so many enterprise architects and other colleagues that skip this step. They say, no, I know it all, and I'm a technical expert. I'm not so interested in the process model. Yeah, be aware that you should spend more time in reading all the stuff you can get. Right? The product model. What are they doing? Which projects are ongoing? So what I always do is I have a look at the project portfolio management, the initiatives, the big changes, what changes are going right now. There's a lot of balls already in the air, like in juggling, right? You must understand where the changes are coming from and in which direction the company is changing. What I always look at is the org chart. So how is the company organized? Because then you can get away, can find and have an idea about what are the people doing Is this a functional organization? Is this a well-designed organization? And of course, architecture quite often, and enterprise design quite often, starts with structuring the teams, and you can read a lot about how are the teams structured. That's a very important input. So this pattern sounds obvious, but I've seen it so often that people skip it too fast. Yeah, and the reason, what you really want to have, you want to have a deep understanding of existing work, and this helps you to be respected, because in the next pattern we will see we must connect with the key players, we must connect with the seasoned experts, we must connect with the executives. And one of my biggest finding is stay curious and ask and ask and ask. That's not only to get information, it's also a social thing, because then people trust you. And when people feel, hey, this guy is so curious and he's a quick learner, and I feel as he could understand us, it's really important for your social standing and your position to build trust. This will be one of the next pattern.
So there's a question: what if the documentation is old and outdated? And I have an answer for that. That's information. That's really good to know, because that gives you two bits of information. First of all, that there is a gap somewhere between what is happening and what is being documented. And the second thing is that that gap says something about the organization that you either need to address. So you need to have some idea, how can we close that gap? Or it means that the documentation is not important to these people, and maybe there's other sources of knowledge that you need to tap into, which is usually other people. So you always learn something from it. But
Yeah.
I see the worst mistake you could make is not check the documentation and only discover this much later, right? You assume that everything is properly documented, and halfway through the project you discover that everything you assumed turns out to be completely outdated. Then you're in trouble.
Yeah, and there's a question by Raj. In many organizations, the knowledge wisdom is only in the heads of people. How much do you try to understand? So what I usually do is I try to scribble some kinds of maps, like a capability map. I do that from day 2. That's just for my understanding. So I try to get a model of at least what's going on. What are the products? What are the capabilities? What are the goals, maybe? And the picture is totally incomplete on day 1. Of course it is. And I try to get as much information as needed to have a good understanding. Let's say just enough understanding for the next patterns. And we will see when we enhance our impact, when we enlarge it, we will get more and more information on the go. Yeah? And of course, when we are outside of the spiral, the company, the whole enterprise needs information to be co-designed. So it's a collaborative. Co-design means a collaborative information gathering process, maybe. But that's part of the next patterns.
So if we look at the question about the current knowledges in software systems, and not many people are aware of what happens there.
Okay.
I wouldn't personally look in the code, but I would definitely go and look for people that can do that for me, right? I would connect to other co-creators that have the in-depth knowledge and see what we can do together to sketch out more of the missing bits. And because we're in this beginning of this spiral, it may not necessarily be that you want all the information, but you want to know who can help you get it when it's necessary. So it's also building up your network, saying, well, those people know that part. If I need more information, there's some people there that I need to be friends with. So it's discovering where the information is and who could give you access to it that is more important here than getting everything already figured out. And it's the same with hidden information. You find where the information is hidden by the gaps that you discover when you talk to different people. So be aware of the gaps. And then I'm not necessarily filling in the gaps straight away, but at least I'm becoming aware of the gaps existing.
Yep.
Yeah. And then there's one more question, Wolfgang, sorry, because
that's a long one from Sander.
The standard approach when people have assessment of their own levels that you don't agree with, or the gaps that they are not aware of, right? Everybody has their blind spots. One thing that I try to do often is to come with maturity assessments. So I'm not going to tell them, is this good or bad? I'm going to show them that everything you do in an organization has maturity levels. From you've just started to you've done it so often you've even forgotten how it works because it's completely automatic and nobody thinks about it anymore. And so I have maturity discussions.
Yeah.
That usually is a good way of getting people to see that, hey, maybe their own assessment is not the best assessment.
Yeah. And I usually, what I use are capability maps for that. So you have the enterprise and then you say, okay, what are our basic capabilities? So we need to do billing and we need to do finance and so on. And once you have an understanding of these business components of the business, then you can start to heat map it. So that's a simple tool to make it visual, but of course you need interviews and you need a lot of more of exploration. Maybe we should go to the next pattern.
Yeah, let's go to the next pattern.
That happens when you go outside the spiral. But yeah, if you ask us for a tool, I use capability maps, and there's also a webinar.
Yeah, and heat maps is a good way of doing it as well. So this one, let's try to keep this one simple. You need to stimulate the collaboration between many people in the enterprise. We don't believe that anyone can change an enterprise on their own. In fact, you need a lot of people. And one of the things that you can do as an enterprise designer is to help other people form groups of coalitions and collaboration. It's not about you, it's about getting them to work better together. Because in most situations, people are not working well together. In most enterprises, small as well as large ones, you find silos. You find that people are working to their own agenda, not to the shared agenda. And that's going to backfire on you if you don't start addressing that very early on in your journey. It's the collaboration and the cross-fertilization that is important here. So connect with people from different parts of the company with different roles. Connect with people on different levels. Don't only go to the managers or only to the developers, but just talk about, I talk to the people in the canteen, and I talk to the cleaners, and I talk to the people doing the parking. Why? Because those people are part of the enterprise as well, and they need to work together at some point. Find out what is important for those people. So it's getting their perspective on the world. That's the first thing you do to build coalitions, because when you find out what is important to them, then you can bring people with similar concerns together from very different parts of the organization. Well, hey, if this is important to you and it's important to them, why don't you go and talk together? And if you need some help, I can facilitate. So basically, coalition building is about planting the seeds to encourage people to collaborate more.
Yeah. And for me, it's also about working with their energy, working with their brains. You must be aware, any type, no matter which kind of designer, architect you are, you'd never have the power to design the enterprise, to architect it. Yeah? We never have it. It means that we need to have the power, the energy, the creativity of the whole enterprise. So you must work with their energy, and I think that's this pattern all about. And maybe this one is related to it. I like this illustration, right? So as an enterprise design coach or enterprise architect, however you want to call your role, you must be aware that you might have a compass, like in the front of this ship. You're there with the compass, and you help maybe the C-suite or the executives, the heads of the business units, whoever makes the decision. Yeah, it's always about having sound decisions that steer the ship in the direction of a better enterprise. So that's what we want to have. And we must be aware that we just can help with a little compass, and that we will need the help from some friends, like in the Beatles song, right? So with a little help of the friends. And you must be aware that change always leads to political resistance. We all know that. That's the politics, right? And the successes I had, and in some jobs, I was really not successful. In some, I was pretty successful. I've done 12 or 13 projects in the enterprise architecture space. And the difference was the successful ones were promoted by C-suite, or at least heads of the business units. So there was somebody that did all the dirty. I don't know if it's dirty, but all the daily political jobs. So be aware that you have a clear separation of roles. Try to nurture trust, to understand personal concerns, because change threatens people. Change threatens because some managers might have less influence. Some managers might have more influence because their topic might be better and so on. Be aware about it. Understand the personal concerns. Create a story that shows how you can relieve their pains. Position what you create, the maps, for example, as management instruments. So with all of our enterprise design stuff, we say that maybe our most important stakeholders are executives, and our maps are not for the enterprise architecture space only or for the service design space only. At the end, we want to have simple management instruments where we help managers to make better decisions. And so you have a clear separation of roles. You help with a collaborative co-design process, and they help with some political support. That's why this pattern was really important for us. Any questions here? Not yet. Okay. Shall we go to the next one? No questions?
Yeah.
Nope.
So then we get to a point that we've collected information and we've created some coalitions, and we have a clearer idea of what we are actually embarking on. At some point, together with the people that are most important in shaping this, it's a good idea to actually write it down and present it so that people can read it, take it in, process it, and give feedback and make it theirs. I think this is a step that it's easily skipped because people either jump way too quickly into execution and, we're going to build this and these are all the activities. But this is not so much about the activities. This is about your understanding of the goal of the whole operation, the outcomes, if you will, and some of the basic principles according to which you are going to work together. Now, it's also important that to not make this your document. And this is difficult because even in my last assignment, I ended up being the author of it. And then people thought that I was the owner of it because I wrote it. And I had a hard time getting other people to understand. No, I'm just the scribe, right? I'm just putting words on paper. I'm not the one that owns this document. You should be the owner. So it took me actually 3 months to throw it back at them all the time and say, no, I want you to run this. It's your charter. This is what we agree on together that we are going to do, and some of the behavioral rules around how we are going to do it. If you do this well at some point and they own this charter, then the charter is one of the things that you use as one of those compasses that Wolfgang was mentioning. So whenever we have an important moment or we've done some important work, we go to the charter and say, so are we actually following our charter? Do we need to adjust our course, or do we need to adjust our charter? That's what it's for. And yeah, we could show some examples. I don't have them at hand. But the last one, for instance, was for a justice department. And what the charter said was, we need a new infrastructure so that all the units can work together on the same infrastructure. We want to break down the walls of the silos. So every project is always a mixed project. Units will all contribute to every project. And the most important KPI was customer satisfaction. That was within the charter. So from now on, instead of measuring productivity and throughput and God knows what else, the most important one that we were going to measure was customer satisfaction. That was what was in the charter. And then I had some behavioral rules about we meet so often, and when we meet, we rotate the chairperson. When decisions are being made, this is how the decisions are being recorded, some simple stuff. But the most important thing was not the content, it was that everybody contributed to the document, and they felt at the end, this is really our document, our charter.
Yeah, okay. And then there's a question by Raj Ramesh. People who hired you might want quick returns, come and fix our problem. However, it is best to take people on the journey. How do you typically handle that?
Always tension there. Of course, they want quick returns, but the problem is, they can have quick returns that are really poorly done, or they can have slow returns that actually give them what they need. And I don't have a clear and simple answer there. What I do recommend and do myself is see if there are some quick wins that you can do in the meantime. Then you don't have to do them yourself, but you can find people that can help you achieve some quick wins that show to the most important decision makers that you're helping. Right. So with the Justice Department, for instance, we solved a very simple document processing problem. I knew a few people that had a very smart solution to digital signatures that were going wrong, and I said, "Look, I'll solve that for you." That was a win, and on the power of that win, they gave me more time to go deep with some of the other stuff. But yeah, that takes a bit of navigation there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that, Richard, your question leads perfectly to the next pattern, because, Richard, you ask, how do you apply this principle in a federated group of companies
Yeah.
that make up the enterprise, each within their own objectives? Yeah, for me, this is a beautiful and leads to the next next slide here. You are absolutely right. We believe that if you want to call yourself an enterprise designer, enterprise architect, whatever, and there's this big term enterprise, and we see an enterprise can consist of several businesses. You have several companies that together have a joint journey or joint endeavor, if you want. And we believe that vision building, identity, a story, so these are elements in our enterprise design language, right? So we have shared purpose, shared identity, shared story, and that enterprise design should start there. And if you don't have a shared sense of why and some alignment between all of these parties, and these parties can be several businesses and they can be departments. If you're a company, and then usually you're a big company, yeah, like General Electrics or something like that. So you're so huge and you have hundreds of business units. I don't know how many actually. You must spend enough work to come up with a compelling why, with a purpose statement. And I would say most companies I've seen lack of a compelling, clear vision statement. We know them, there are a few, yeah, and probably the first that come to your mind might be the same that come to my mind. But what I think that the statement here is that enterprise design includes, of course, the why questions and the identity. So in this pattern, what it says, that usually enterprises lack a clear sense of why. Yeah, and if it does, it's no wonder that many initiatives are not aligned, because they cannot be aligned. If you don't have this, it's like in the North Star, right? If you're not aligned, of course, you then have change initiatives and enterprise design that doesn't have any direction. And so our tip for you as an enterprise design coach or enterprise architect, whatever you call your own business architect, help your enterprise producing a compelling shared vision. Dare to challenge it. It's not a good idea that somebody else did it. Yeah, usually executives then they go to a strategy consultancy. Please help us with a vision statement, vision strategy. You know that it happens somewhere and then it falls from the sky and it's imposed on people. We all have seen that. That's not a good idea. Enterprise design means a constant feedback loop between these typical architecture maps, capabilities, processes, IT stuff. If it's not in a feedback loop with the mission and the identity, it can't work. And that's the situation I see everywhere. Yeah, and we want to change this with intersection group. Make it concrete enough. It must be a vision, of course, compelling, but concrete enough. So this connection between a vision statement, a mission statement, identity, however you want to call it, must be reflected by your capability map, for example. Yeah, what are we doing and why are we doing it? That's the pattern here about. Okay, is there anything to add, Bart?
Well, I have examples, but a good vision is also a reminder for people. So when they start getting into conflicts or they start veering off in their own direction, that you can pull them back and say, so how is this actually contributing to your vision? And then you get surprising results. I had one example in mind. I worked with Child Protection Agency, and they had all sorts of infights about processes and responsibilities and decision making. And so I had to put them in a room and said, look, what is the single most important outcome of your organization? It's in the name. It's child protection. So whatever you're fighting over, you need to explain to me how it contributes to protecting more children or protecting children better. If you can't do that, then we're talking about the wrong things. And people actually cried over this because they're totally forgotten that they have a mission, right? They don't only have a vision, they have a mission that is important to their customers, even life and death situations. So bring the vision to a point that you can bring it up as part of the compass, where it's concrete enough that you can say, is it contributing to the vision or is it just a distraction? And that takes time. I'm not saying that you have this ready on day one, but it's really important to have that. Yeah.
Yeah, and there was this question: are guiding principles good candidates to be part of a vision? I think they can be, right? And this vision mission, that's this classical way of doing it.
Yeah.
And with intersection group, so if you're interested in our thoughts, there is also a webinar where we explain this green facet, that's the identity, the why facet. And currently we have the element purpose. So that's a purpose statement that goes deeper probably than usual goals, and story. So what are we doing and why are we doing it?
Yeah.
So if you're interested, there's an edgy webinar. You can see it on our website. There we talk about a bit more about.
There's only one thing about guiding principles that I find difficult, and that is they usually become too abstract, too rational. And the vision has to have an emotional component that people really buy into and feel part of. So with guiding principles, maybe in addition, but if you only have guiding principles, I usually find that people don't really buy into it with their whole heart and soul. They nod and they say yes, but they don't really feel it. So there's work to be done there. I think we need to move on, otherwise we're
Yeah,
never
we
get to the
need.
end
I
of the
think this
book.
is your one. Want to say a few words about the negotiation?
I'll do the safe negotiation space.
Please.
This is basically a skill, a craft you need to practice and need to be really good at, is to make it safe for people to work together and challenge each other and do the hard negotiations in a soft and safe way. Because you don't want them to fight about things, but you also don't want them to just be sheep and nod and let people walk over them. And creating that safe space, as I said, it's a craft, it's a bit of an art, but it means that people have to feel comfortable with being together with people they may not know, people that have different interests, different departments, and yet that the feeling is that together will come out better than alone. I'm currently doing some work on psychological safety, and there's actually steps you need to go through. And so if you want to know more about this, we can talk about the steps, but we don't have time for that. This is really about helping people feel comfortable working together. Yeah. And if you do this well, then you get this interesting situation that conflicts become positive things. Conflicts become ways to resolve creative differences and to bring perspectives together, challenge perspectives in a soft way, and come out with more understanding and more collaboration. If you do it wrong, it's very easy to see if you do it wrong, because then every conflict becomes a fight. And instead of sharing perspectives, people are beating each other over the head with their perspectives. And that's not what we want. So that's the shortest version, I think, Wolfgang.
Okay.
Yeah.
Questions?
No.
No
Just
questions
thumbs
yet.
up. Yeah.
Negotiation. I think this is a big topic because we must be aware that there are interests to be negotiated, and enterprise design is not like building architecture, building design, or building a machine, because the material are human beings and each one with its own will. So
More
it's always
variables.
it's a constant negotiation stuff, and you need to work with the energy, as mentioned before, with this coalition building, right? Bring the people to this negotiation space, make conflicts visible, make visible why they cannot agree. Sometimes it's terminology, usually it's a lack of clarity, or not that there is not a shared vision and so on. So I think the enterprise design coach's job is very much about bringing clarity, facilitating, making things visibly, facilitating this kind of negotiation space. maybe a few words to add from my side.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and we are already at number 8. So 4 more to go, clear ownerships. You all know enterprises where ownerships are not clear. And what does ownership mean? Have you ever seen a company with clear process owners, for example? Process management was big in the 90s and still is prevalent in many companies. And process owners in Austria, at least, are really hard to find, for example. And then have you ever done capability modeling and tried to find owners for those capabilities? And then it gets really tough, because as soon as you build a capability map, what are we really doing and who is capable for this capability, you reveal hidden political conflicts of interest, because you bring clarity, right? And usually organizations in the current state, I've never seen a really super healthy one. There are always unclear ownerships and overlapping accountabilities, and some battles between departments and so on. And with enterprise design maps, with some maps we have, we say, okay, let's for one moment, let's look at the enterprise like this this chicken here and this field of wheat and corn and carrots and so on. Who's accountable for this part of the enterprise, for this capability, this process, for this data governance, the next stuff, where the clear data owner, everybody needs owner. And that's tough. But you need decisions. At the end, you must have clear ownerships, people feeling accountable for the design of a certain part, of certain capability, a certain information entity. And after, I think, 16 years of enterprise architecture, I come more and more to the conclusion that my main job is defining these bubbles, so capabilities, and finding owners. And once I have the owners and clarity about what they own and what's the boundary between somebody else's accountability, then it works much better. Because it's a counterforce, right, against the decay of enterprise design. If you don't have clear accountabilities, architecture decays, and that's what we see in all enterprises. In the IT, if you look at the IT landscape of most enterprises, I call this architecture decay, because people are not aware about their accountability, but about the IT assets. So our tip here is help the enterprise assigning clear ownerships. Sometimes you need committees. Sometimes it are teams or individual. It depends, of course. And make sure to leave enough design freedom for autonomous teams, because agility is a good thing. And it can make sense to have ownership by an autonomous team. And within a certain boundary, this team is accountable to design this part of the enterprise. For example, this product, like in a product organization, biz DevOps or something like that. So freedom is a good idea, but defining the boundaries between different parts of the enterprise might also be a good idea. There's a question.
I have one thing to add. You don't just look for who owns things.
Yeah.
You also look for what is not owned at all. We call that the white spaces, right? If you walk through an enterprise, you find things that nobody takes responsibility for, nobody feels any ownership for. Those white spaces are very important to identify, because that's where the decay starts. So you have overlapping ownership where people fight over it, and you have spaces that nobody claims, but they are important. So look for the white spaces as well. And there is a question. My company is doing a lot of for data ownership by data governance. Can we as EA leverage that work for capabilities ownership, for example? I would say yes. I would say that's a starting point, but lift it to capability level quickly, because you don't want to get stuck in the data ownership. It's not the same as the capability that it supports, and there may be several capabilities resting on that data. So make sure you lift it to the capability level to get clarity. Yeah.
I think seeing ownership broader than data ownership is really helpful.
Yeah.
If you only run data governance, then you have a very small focus on the enterprise. So, and having ownership is good, but try to leverage it to capability model and ask who's accountable for this capability. It's quite natural. So yeah, it's a good idea to have both. That's my statement.
Okay, now let's move
So
one further.
this is one for you.
I'd rather want you to do this one. This is
this one. Okay.
Yeah, you love this one.
Change portfolio, right? So I've had a discussion with Chris Potts. If you know him, he wrote some of the best books on enterprise architecture, and he said to me, enterprises are like big ships. They have momentum, right? And they have some energy. They drive slowly across the sea, and each change is an investment. So if you want to change the direction a bit, you need to invest in energy to change this investment. And most companies I know have something like a change portfolio, and no matter if you do it in an agile way, and if you have several safe or somewhat whatever, or you have a more classical multi-project management, make enterprise design the foundation of this change portfolio. Because today what I see is that the people driving the project portfolio management, change initiatives, the projects that facilitate the pipelining in a safe environment, it does not depend if you're agile or not. It's the same situation. There are changes, right? And be aware that your work, your clarity you bring with your enterprise design maps, with the capability maps, with the processes, with the goals and so on, that they should align to your maps. Yeah, they should be a tool they love to use. Today, I don't see that quite often because the people have their Gantt charts and you see a list of 200 projects and some dependencies, and nobody really knows how the projects are connected with the goals of the company and so on. And with enterprise design, what we want to understand how does the company work? That's our blue facet, yeah, capabilities, processes. Why is it working that way? Why do we need to produce what we want to produce? The green facet is the why and the shared mission. And the red is the experience. How do we feel to the outer world? Which are our customers? What are our products? And so on. And having this clarity is a very powerful basis for the change portfolio. So each and every decision you make in this change portfolio, so you invest in changes, yeah, and you help the executives, whoever makes the $1 million decisions, making better decisions and having this big ship driving and investing each dollar or euro in the best possible change that makes sense. So with enterprise design and with all of our tools, we want to be at the heart of strategic management and at the heart of this typical project portfolio, change portfolio management. That's the idea of this pattern. So because if you don't have an impact. Otherwise, if you're not there, you can have the best ideas, the best maps. If they are not implemented, and implemented you need some money, and somebody says, yes, I want to have this change. Be aware that you need to be seamlessly connected. And there's also a webinar only about this topic. And I can point you also to the great work of Chris Potts, who's done a lot of work about exactly this topic. So there are no questions here. Oh, someone is typing. Maybe we start
I want to add here, it's called a change portfolio, not a project portfolio. Because projects are about what am I doing, and the change portfolio is about what am I changing and why am I changing it. And so if you forget that it's not about the products or the outcomes of the projects, it's about the effect that the projects have together on your vision and mission. That is the question that needs to be brought back over and over again in that portfolio. And it's you could call it an extra layer on top of the project portfolio, but it's important that the focus is on what are we changing and why. You say much of this lies within the business responsibility, not EA. How do you influence this without creating enemies? Well, that's where you have your coalitions for. If you find that the people that you need to influence are not directly connected to you, then find allies in on the levels that do have that connection. I always found that one of the things that I did as an enterprise architect or enterprise whisperer almost is to find the people that have the influence and work with them and I don't have to directly sit in front of a board, for instance, but if I can inform the person that shares my vision and my ideals, and I can help them score, then they'll become my voice. They'll become my influencer on my behalf. So this is where the political play definitely comes in, understanding the lines of power and the lines of influence. So it may not be a direct link, but there's plenty of indirect links that you can find. That's probably my best answer. I don't know if Wolfgang is still there or that he has left the room. I'm almost afraid that he's left the room, so that's okay because there's two more patterns, and I'm sure I know what to say about them. So if there's no other questions, although
I just pressed the wrong button.
You pressed the wrong button. So someone is typing. So while someone is typing, I'll do. Shall I do the last two then, and then you close the proceedings, Wolfgang?
So I do the shapeheaded
do
realization. I do this one. Okay. Shapeheaded realization. We all know that the people actually building stuff outnumber enterprise architects or other designers by a number of hundreds, probably, because there are so many people actually creating code, and that's the reality. So what they code, that is the reality. And many of us know how hard it can be to have enough impact on these teams, because quite often they have a product owner, and product owner is like Godfather. And if the product owner says, yeah, please implement this feature, they just do it. And if you then go to them and say, well, it's not the best enterprise design, that might be a bit too late. And yes, enterprise design, enterprise architecture, user experience, whatever kind of design is kind of unfamiliar to many software developers, for example, or realization teams. But you need that these teams understand that they play an important part. So you should always also have some coalitions with the people implementing stuff. And how can you do that? Well, invite them to the negotiation space. Be aware that those people, some of them have been working for decades as a software architect, senior software developer, so they have a lot of business knowledge. So go to them and ask them for their advice. They have some business knowledge, so invite them and ask them to co-design, because you must make them aware that implementation, design does not start at software architecture, at software design. It starts at a business level, at the capability level. So our advice here is invite them and ask them, and then they feel part of a co-design aspect. And it's exciting what happens when you have a room of people and you invite the product owner and maybe the senior software architect and maybe other product owners and maybe other seasoned business experts, executives, and so on. And you work on business architecture questions and you work on the capability model. And then you get this kind of co-ownership you need. Then it's not like, hey, there's the cool enterprise architect, the cool enterprise designer that creates a design upfront, and then we get it to realize it, the product owner, and they usually don't care because it's not invented here. We know that. So try to become a trusted advisor, invite them to a co-creation and co-design. And yes, you need your strong co-facilitation skills to find sound compromises. I've done that. I know that there are always compromises needed between higher goals. There's a huge danger that we as enterprise designers or coaches, enterprise architects, we have a level of abstractions where people down to earth cannot connect. That happens quite often, right? They say, okay, that's a nice design, but that's unrealistic. We cannot do that. That's just fantasy. And then we have this typically ivory tower enterprise architects. Get out of this ivory tower. Go to the teams, invite them and tell them, hey, that's valuable. It's really valuable. We ask you for your input, but we must start the design and the architecture not at the software level. We must start it on a true business architecture level, on the enterprise design level. That's the idea here. Okay. Is there a question? No, not really.
I've answered the question. It's about the difference between what is written and what it actually does. Look at the design creation patterns for more information about that particular issue. And yeah, there are patterns to address that. So
okay, and we have the final pattern, and we are running out of time, I see. So
I'll do this one really quick, and it's an easy one. It's leaving. Close the door behind you. Forget about this. There may be situations that you've either done what you came to do, and it's no longer working for you. That's a good time to leave. But it could also be that you are no longer able to deliver value to the environment you work for. And then you should have the courage and the honesty to say, well, there's no point in me hanging in here, but it's time to move on. You've tried everything, you've pushed and pushed, and you pulled, and you're not being listened to. And then at some point, there is this moment where you say, okay, why would I keep trying? And this is not failure. That's the thing that we want to impress with this pattern. That's a normal part of the learning. You can't always win, and you need to learn from the things that don't go the way you want. Why didn't it happen? What could I have done differently? What would I do differently next time? So don't see it as a failure. See it as another step in your learning journey. And then go back into the next assignment and try again with all the learning with you. Yeah. So that's actually, for me, one of the favorite patterns, but it's a hard one to do, especially if money comes into play or status, that you have the courage to realize, okay, my usefulness here is done. It's time to move on. Yeah. And of course, as I said, it could also be that you've done what you came to do. And then I find that enterprise architects also make the mistake of overstaying their welcome by doing really good work and then not knowing when to say, well, that's it. Let's move on, and someone else can take over. That's just as important. Yeah. Yeah, exactly, Wolfgang. Usually people stay too long and leave or hand it over to someone else. Yeah. So leaving is part of everybody's career, and it can be internally, right? You don't have to quit. You don't have to quit your job and walk out of the organization. But for one thing, I also advise all enterprise architects and enterprise designers and anyone, after about 3 years of doing the same thing, stop for a moment and think are you really learning anything anymore? And if you're not learning anymore, then maybe it's time to try something else for a while. Maybe not for always, but just to refresh your perspective on what you're doing. Yeah.
Okay, and I think that's a perfect pattern for the end. Before you leave, we just have only a few slides to tell a bit about who we are. So we are the Intersection Group, and I founded it together with Milan Günther 1 year ago as a not-for-profit association. And our mission, so that's our identity, we help people create better enterprises. That's our goal. And we do that with a lot of stuff, and our heart is our community. That's our most valuable resource. So Bart, for example, is one of 80 advising members. He's one amongst the most active ones. So we have also Chris Potts and many, many people. And what we are doing is not only giving these webinars. So that's maybe an advertisement for what's the next, what's upcoming. So Bart, together with Annika, our business architect lady from Sweden, he will talk about another category of the patterns, about the behavior patterns. You want to say one sentence about this session? January 12th, that's the next.
It's the most important session for anybody, because this is where you can really make a difference in how people see you and how willing people are to work with you. And it's overlooked a lot. So please come and hear what we have to say on this. It's the most important chapter in the entire book.
It is. Beautiful stuff in there. Okay, so there are some webinars, but it's not only Intersection Group. Webinars are important for us. So go to our page, Intersection Group events, to stay tuned. There's a lot to come. Yeah, and as you see, we will talk about service design, about enterprise architecture. We have some storytelling webinars and so on. So stay tuned or connect to us via LinkedIn. And of course, there's a book, and we have this Christmas offer, special offer. Buy it now, so don't want to push it too much. Please better buy it at enterprisedesignpatterns.com, because then Jeff Bezos won't get even richer. So then Amazon gets 30%. We want you to buy it there, of course, we want. Yeah, that's it.
Yep.
And if you want to
Slightly over
join our,
time, but not too bad.
I think we are in time.
Yeah.
And if you, let's stay in contact with a
Thank you,
LinkedIn
Jim.
channel, or you can register at our blog. And we wish you all a nice celebration with your family.
Yeah.
The
Stay
last webinar of
safe.
this year.
Don't get COVID. And start thinking about your personal vision for next year. I think that was a brilliant idea. Yeah.
Okay, so I stop recording.